make a call on the Trans-Tasman Proceedings Bill, and to note that this is a continuation and enhancement of the process of the closer economic relationship with Australia, which I have to acknowledge began under a national government in the late 1970s, early 1980s, under the Honourable Hugh Templeton, and it got support from the Labor leader Bill Rolling at that time and took off, and it was a very appropriate and timely move for this country. It acknowledges the strength and depth of our relationship with Australia, and this bill continues to acknowledge that, and that's important. I think it's also important that we have some complementarity where possible in the judicial systems of Australia and New Zealand, and this bill endeavours to implement some of those. And it's important we have that because obviously the capacity of New Zealanders to travel to Australia and Australians to come to New Zealand is ever increasing, and obviously our court systems have to acknowledge that fact that people aren't always domiciled in one country. They can be living in one country, crossing to the other, and court proceedings can in fact take place in one, and this bill effectively allows some sort of acknowledgement that there are issues that need to be resolved in courts across the two countries. But there are still some gaps that I wanted to just allude to, and I'm facing one with a constituent at the moment who's had to return to Australia to face proceedings in their equivalent of our family court in relation to a custody case. It's a very distressing and harrowing case because this poor young woman has been forced to go back to Australia by the father of her child under circumstances which suggested that the father wanted to have ongoing contact with the child. She's now been back in Australia for some 9 months, and the father has not made any contact. In fact, he's on the run from police in 2 states in Australia, we understand. I wanted to acknowledge the intervention last week of the Minister of Justice, Simon Power, who's asked his officials to investigate, and also asked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to provide whatever assistance it can to this poor young constituent of mine who's faced with the ongoing demands and delays of a court system of which she has no knowledge, no power, no real authority in her view to try and expedite proceedings. This bill doesn't extend to those issues. This bill is more around the business community and those sorts of relationships. But it is a signal, this case that I'm dealing with at the moment, a signal of the need for real complementarity between the justice systems of our two countries, because we are a very movable nation. Our affairs are often interwoven with Australian affairs. Our business and family relationships are increasingly taking us across the Tasman, back and forwards, and this bill is an attempt to expedite those issues. This is a bill that, of course, began under Helen Clark's leadership. It's come through the Parliament. It's been through the Select Committee process. It will effectively reduce some of the complexities and costs that are there in place in Trans-Tasman litigation and provide better remedies. It is therefore a very sensible measure. Through facilitating the effective resolution of Trans-Tasman disputes, this bill will foster those ever-increasing economic relationships with Australia and New Zealand. That is important. It is simplifying proceedings within our courts and the enforcement of judgments. That is very sensible. We obviously have had an increasing and significant increase in the movement of peoples and assets and services across the Tasman. Obviously they are going to be subject to disputes from time to time. Therefore it is important that we have this arrangement, which is perhaps internationally one of the best arrangements between any two sovereign states with separate legal systems. We still retain entire independence in respect of our judicial system, but we obviously wanted to try and make sure that there were as few impediments as possible to the process of justice, whether you're on this side of the Tasman or the other. And the Trans-Tasman Working Group worked through these issues. It was set up by Helen Clark and John Howard back in 2003. It's brought forward the proposals which are now enmeshed in this bill. It is appropriate that we now move to seeing this bill passed and towards that closer integration of New Zealand and Australia's civil justice systems, so we can continue to develop and foster that closer economic relationship which began even before the time of the Honourable Maurice Williamson in this House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The question is that the amendments in the name of the Honourable Simon Power set out on SOP number 160 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. It's agreed. The question now is that parts 1 and 2, schedules 1 and 2, clauses 1 and 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The motion is agreed to. I will report this bill with amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the committee has considered the Trans-Tasman Proceedings Bill and reports it with amendment. Mr. Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
Members, the question is that the report be adopted. Those who are of that opinion will say aye. Contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. This bill is set down for third reading forthwith. I call the Honourable Maurice Williamson.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Trans-Tasman Proceedings Bill be now read a third time. Mr. Speaker, this bill is an important milestone in the